The dust in the Arizona territory tells no lies. It clings to hope and sorrow all the same. Out here, a person's story isn't written in ink. It's carved in sweat and blood, and the lines etched around their eyes by a relentless sun. What you're about to hear is one of those stories. A tale that unfolded at a desolate train station, where the line between civilization and the raw wilderness blurred completely. It's a story about a woman who had nothing left but the will to run, and the man from a world away who refused to let her fall. What could possibly bruise a soul so badly that the unforgiving desert felt like a kindness? Stay with me, and you'll find out. The 3:10 train to Prescott was already a shimmering mirage in the distance. Its whistle was a fading cry against the vast, indifferent silence of the Arizona territory. For Abigail Hayes, that sound was the death knell of her last hope. She stood on the splintered platform of the Serenity Creek station, a place whose name was a cruel joke. There was no serenity here, only the oppressive weight of the August sun and the suffocating grip of pure animal fear. Every inch of her body was a symphony of pain. A purple and black bruise blossomed across her left cheekbone, swelling her eye half shut. Her lip was split, a fresh testament to the last time she had dared to speak her mind. Beneath the high collar of her worn calico dress, a necklace of darker bruises told a story she couldn't bear to remember. She had hidden the worst of it, but she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands, or the way she flinched whenever the station master, a portly man named Mr. Abernathy, cleared his throat too loudly. She had been here for 3 hours, a ghost clinging to the single bench in the sliver of shade offered by the station's overhang. She'd used her last $2 to buy the ticket, the metal cool and heavy in her palm like a promise. But Jedediah was faster than she'd thought. Faster and meaner. A rider had thundered in an hour ago, his horse lathered and gasping. He hadn't spoken to her, but he'd gone straight to the telegraph office. A few minutes later, Mr. Abernathy had emerged, his face pale, refusing to meet her gaze. There's been a problem with the line, ma'am," he had stammered, his eyes fixed on a loose floorboard. "The train's been rerouted. Won't be another till Saturday." Saturday was 4 days away. 4 days she absolutely did not have. She knew in her bones it was a lie. Jedediah had reached them. Her husband, the respected Deputy Jedediah Croft, had extended his long, brutal arm all the way to this dusty outpost. He had money, and he had influence. He owned the law in their corner of the territory. And men like Abernathy were easily bought with a silver dollar or a whispered threat. The world began to tilt. The edges of her vision blurred, the rust-colored landscape dissolving into a nauseating soup of heat and light. She clutched the locket around her neck, its cheap tin casing digging into her skin. It was all she had left of her father, the one thing Jedediah hadn't taken from her, because inside it held the secret Jedediah would kill to protect. He thought he'd beaten it out of her, thought she'd forgotten, but it was there, nestled against her heart, her last desperate gamble. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. She had walked for 2 days to get here, surviving on a handful of hardtack and the brackish water from a dying stream. She hadn't slept. She hadn't dared. Now, exhaustion and despair were a tide pulling her under. The station platform seemed to sway beneath her feet like the deck of a storm-tossed ship. But it wasn't just exhaustion. Something else was wrong. A strange heaviness settled in her limbs, a thick fog clouding her thoughts. The water Abernathy had given her an hour ago. It had tasted funny, bitter. She'd been so thirsty she hadn't cared. Now she knew. He hadn't just lied to her. He had drugged her. He was making sure she couldn't run. Making sure she was right here when Jedediah arrived. From the far end of the platform, a man watched. He had been there when she arrived, leaning against a support beam, motionless as a statue carved from the red rock of the canyons. He was Apache. It was plain in the proud set of his jaw, the straight line of his black hair held back by a simple leather band, and the keen, unblinking intensity of his dark eyes. He wore tanned buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt. He was an anomaly at the white man's station, ignored by Abernathy, given a wide berth by the few prospectors who had come and gone. He had watched her silent desperation, her trembling facade, and the moment the telegraph operator's message had shattered it. He saw what the others didn't, or chose not to see. The raw terror of a hunted animal, cornered. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of his own people. He knew its language. He saw the subtle map of violence on her skin, and he recognized the signature of a coward's rage. And he had seen Abernathy hand her the canteen. He saw the slight tremor in the station master's hand. He knew poison when he saw it. Abigail tried to stand. She had to get away. Not by rail, then by foot. She would walk into the desert. She would what? Die of thirst. Her legs, bruised and screaming, refused to obey. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so profound it stole the air from her lungs. The sun-bleached planks of the platform rushed up to meet her. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the station sign, Serenity Creek, mocking her. The last thing she felt was the splintered wood against her bruised cheek. The station master, Abernathy, rushed out, his face a mask of panicked indecision. "Lord have mercy! What do I—" He wrung his hands, looking toward the trail where he knew Jedediah Croft's posse would soon appear. Helping her was a death sentence. Leaving her there was complicated. But before he could take another step, a shadow fell over him. The Apache warrior moved with a fluid grace that was startling. He was no longer a passive observer. His presence filled the space, silent and absolute. He didn't look at Abernathy. His eyes were fixed on the crumpled form of the woman on the ground. With a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with his formidable appearance, he knelt. He brushed a stray lock of sweat-dampened hair from her face, his touch surprisingly light. He saw the true extent of the swelling around her eye, the raw cut on her lip. His own face, a mask of stoicism, tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners of his mouth. Without a word, he slid one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. He lifted her as if she weighed no more than a child's doll. She was all sharp angles and fragile bones. Abernathy found his voice, a terrified squeak. "Here now! You can't! Deputy Croft is on his way! She's his wife! You put her down!" The Apache warrior paused, turning his head just enough to pin the station master with a gaze as hard and ancient as obsidian. The look was not one of rage, but of cold, bottomless contempt. It spoke of broken treaties and stolen lands, of 1,000 injustices, large and small. In that single glance, Abernathy saw the foolishness of his protest. He saw that this man did not recognize the authority of Jedediah Croft, nor any white man's law. This man operated by a code far older than the United States government. Without another sound, the warrior turned and walked away from the station, carrying Abigail Hayes in his arms. He moved not towards the dusty trail, but towards the forbidding, sun-scorched wilderness, a landscape of canyons and mesas that would swallow a man whole. He walked into the heart of the desert, leaving the world of telegraphs and timetables behind, carrying its broken refuse with him. The world returned to Abigail in fragments. First, a rhythmic swaying motion, then the scent of dust, horsehide, and something else, something clean and wild, like sagebrush after a rare rain. She wasn't on the hard planks of the station anymore. She was being carried. A profound sense of security, so alien it was terrifying, enveloped her. She dared to open her good eye a fraction. She saw the steady rise and fall of a powerful chest, the tanned column of a strong neck. Her head was pillowed on a shoulder that felt as solid as sun-warmed stone. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to pierce through the fog of her exhaustion. She was being taken, abducted, a new nightmare replacing the old one. She tried to struggle, but her limbs were lead. Her cry was a pathetic whimper. A voice, low and calm, spoke near her ear. The words were not in English, but the tone was unmistakable. It was meant to soothe, not to threaten. It was the kind of sound one might use to gentle a frightened horse. Reluctantly, her body betrayed her fear, relaxing into the strength that held her. For the first time in over a year, she was being held without violence, and the sheer novelty of it was disarming. She succumbed to the darkness again. They traveled for what felt like hours. The man from the station moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime spent traversing this unforgiving land. He had a horse, a lean Mustang with intelligent eyes, which he had tied in a thicket a mile from the station. He mounted and settled her in front of him, one arm a steel band around her waist, holding her securely against him as the horse picked its way through a maze of arroyos and rock formations. He moved with purpose, leaving no trail a novice tracker could follow, doubling back on his own path through rocky ground where the horse's hooves would leave little sign. He was Kyle, a name given to him by a white trader years ago that had simply stuck. Among his people, he was known as Nantan, but he hadn't felt worthy of that name in a long time. He was a man caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He'd traded with the white men, learned their tongue and their ways, enough to see the greed and decay behind their confident smiles. He had also seen the despair in his own people as their lands were squeezed, their traditions eroded. He had become a solitary wanderer, a watcher. And in the bruised and broken woman from the station, he had seen the same cruel disregard for life that his people had suffered for generations. It was an impulse he did not fully understand, a protective instinct that felt both foreign and deeply right. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, Kyle guided the horse into a narrow fissure in a towering rock wall. It looked like a dead end. But after 100 yards, the passage opened into a hidden box canyon. It was a sanctuary. A trickle of clear water flowed from a spring in the rock face, feeding a cluster of cottonwood trees and a patch of impossibly green grass. The air was 10 degrees cooler here, sheltered from the wind and the direct sun. Ancient, faded pictographs of spirits and animals adorned the canyon walls, silent witnesses to centuries of use as a sacred place. This was the Canyon of Whispers, a place of healing known to only a few. He gently dismounted, lifting Abigail from the saddle and carrying her to a small, shallow cave set into the base of the canyon wall. The floor was covered in fine, soft sand. He laid her down on his own bedroll, his movements deliberate and respectful. Abigail awoke to the crackle of a small, smokeless fire. The pain was still there, a dull, throbbing ache, but the sharp edges had softened. She was propped against a saddle, a blanket tucked around her. The Apache man was crouched by the fire, tending to something in a small pot. The aroma of herbs and simmering broth filled the small cave. He saw that she was awake. He rose and came to her, holding out a canteen. "Drink," he said. His English was clear, with only a slight accent, the words spoken carefully, as if he tasted each one. She hesitated, her ingrained fear of strangers, especially of men, battling with a desperate thirst. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Seeing her hesitation, he simply set the canteen down beside her, within her reach, and returned to the fire. He was giving her a choice. Jedediah had never given her a choice. Slowly, her trembling hand reached for the canteen. The water was cool and sweet, the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. He brought her a small wooden bowl of the broth. It was made from dried meat and wild roots she didn't recognize. It was thin, but warm and nourishing. She drank it greedily, the warmth spreading through her chilled limbs. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why did you help me?" Kyle looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. For a long moment he was silent, studying her face. He wasn't looking at her bruises, but into her one good eye, searching for something. "I have seen the wolf chase the rabbit," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I have seen the hawk strike the dove. I do not help the wolf or the hawk." The simplicity of his answer was staggering. It wasn't about pity. It wasn't about charity. It was a statement of principle as fundamental as the rocks surrounding them. In his world there was a natural order, and the strong preying on the weak was a part of it. But a man preying on a woman, that was an aberration, a sickness. He saw the fear still lurking in her eyes, the ingrained expectation of payment for any kindness. "You are safe here," he added, his voice softer. "He will not find this place." That night Abigail slept more deeply than she had in years. She was still in pain, still terrified of the future, but she was in a place untouched by Jedediah Croft. As she drifted off to the sound of the crackling fire and the gentle whisper of the wind through the cottonwoods, she felt a tiny, fragile seed of something she thought had been beaten out of her for good, a glimmer of hope. In this hidden canyon, surrounded by the ghosts of ancient spirits, she was, for the first time, not a wife, not a victim, but simply a soul in need of sanctuary. And a quiet, watchful stranger had provided it. But what she didn't know was that this stranger wasn't just a random Good Samaritan. He had been watching Serenity Creek for weeks. He was hunting the same man she was running from. And their paths hadn't crossed by accident. They had collided by design. 3 days passed in the Canyon of Whispers. They were days of quiet healing, measured not by the clock, but by the slow movement of shadows across the canyon floor. Kyle was a silent, unobtrusive presence. He would leave for hours at a time, returning with a rabbit for the pot or fresh herbs. He knew the desert intimately. It was his larder, his apothecary, his home. He made a poultice from crushed leaves that smelled of mint and earth, and applied it gently to the bruised side of her face. The coolness soothed the burning ache, and slowly the swelling began to recede. He never touched her unnecessarily, never invaded her space. He would leave food and water for her, and then retreat to the far side of the fire, mending his gear, or simply watching the stars appear in the sliver of sky visible above them. This gentle distance was the greatest kindness he could have shown her. It allowed Abigail to slowly unfurl from the tight, protective knot of fear she had been tied in for so long. She started to observe him, this man named Kyle. She saw the way he moved with a quiet confidence that was the polar opposite of Jedediah's loud, swaggering brutality. She saw the respect he showed for the land, taking only what he needed, leaving no trace. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were measured and meaningful. On the third evening, as she sat watching him sharpen a knife on a smooth river stone, she found her voice. "My name is Abigail," she said softly. He paused, looking up at her. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Abigail," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "It is a good name." "Your name is Kyle," she stated, more than asked. "It is a name I am called," he replied, not offering more. The silence stretched, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a space she felt safe enough to fill. "He will be looking for me. My husband." The word felt like poison in her mouth. "I know," Kyle said, his attention returning to the knife. "Men like him do not like to lose what they think they own." His insight was so sharp, so accurate, it startled her. Jedediah had often told her, "You are mine, Abby. My property. Same as my horse, my house." Kyle's words validated a truth she had only ever felt in her bones. Emboldened, she reached for the chain around her neck, her fingers closing around the familiar shape of the locket. This was the moment. She didn't know why, but she trusted this quiet man more than she had trusted anyone in years. "He isn't just looking for me," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's looking for this." She unclasped the chain and held the locket out to him. It was a cheap tin thing, dented and tarnished. Kyle looked at it, then at her, his expression unreadable. He made no move to take it. "Open it," she urged. With deliberate movements, he set down his knife and stone, wiped his hands on his buckskin leggings, and took the locket from her. His fingers, though calloused, were surprisingly nimble. He found the small clasp, and a moment later it sprang open. Inside, there were not two, but three compartments. On one side was a faded miniature portrait of a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, Abigail's mother. On the other was a tiny, folded piece of paper. But it was the hidden section that held the real secret. Kyle's keen eyes noticed a slight irregularity in the backing of the mother's portrait. He used his thumbnail to pry it open, revealing a second, more tightly folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased with age. He carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a love letter or a poem. It was a legal document. A land patent, handwritten in precise, elegant script. It described a parcel of land, 40 acres bordering the San Carlos Reservation. At the bottom was a signature, Thomas Hayes, and beside it, the official seal of the Territorial Land Office. "That was my father's." Abigail's voice was barely a whisper. "He was a prospector. He spent years searching for a silver strike he was sure was there. He filed the claim legally, just before he had an accident in the mine, a cave-in." Kyle listened, his gaze fixed on the document. "Jedediah was his partner," she continued, the words tumbling out now, a torrent of long-suppressed truth. "After Papa died, Jedediah was so kind. He looked after me. He said Papa had left me with nothing but debts. He offered to marry me, to give me a home, to protect me. I was 16, I was alone. I thought he was my savior." Her voice broke. "But it was all a lie. The mine wasn't a bust. A few months after we were married, he discovered a rich vein of silver, the same one my father had been looking for. He filed his own claim, said my father's was invalid. He became a rich man overnight. He bought his deputy's badge, bought influence, bought the whole town. And he bought me." Kyle looked from the patent to her face, finally understanding. "This is the true claim. It's the original," she confirmed, a single tear tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. "My father gave it to me just before his last trip to the mine. He put it in my locket. He said, 'Never let this go, Abby. It's your future.' I never knew what he meant. Not until years later, when I overheard Jedediah drunk one night, bragging to a friend about how he'd cheated a dead man and married his dim-witted daughter to seal the deal. And then she said the words that changed everything. He bragged about how he'd arranged the accident." The confession hung in the air, heavy and ugly. She had never spoken these words aloud to anyone. Kyle carefully refolded the patent and placed it back in its hidden compartment. He snapped the locket shut and handed it back to her. His face was grim, his eyes hard. He had heard 100 stories of white men's treachery, but this one was a special kind of poison. "This is a dangerous thing," he said, his voice low. "It is not just proof of his theft. It is proof of his murder." "I know," she whispered, clutching the locket to her chest. "It's why I ran. I was going to Prescott to find a U.S. Marshal, someone Jedediah couldn't buy. It's all I have left. It's my father's legacy, and my only chance at justice." Kyle stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. His own past was a landscape of loss, of land stolen not by a single man's trickery, but by a nation's relentless greed. He saw Abigail's story not just as her own, but as a small, personal reflection of a much larger crime. The man, Jedediah Croft, was not just a monster who brutalized his wife. He was a thief who stole from the dead, who built his fortune on a foundation of lies and blood. And the land he had stolen. Kyle had a cold feeling he knew exactly where it was. The description on the patent stirred a dark memory. He looked at Abigail, at her fierce, desperate hope. His initial act of intervention had been an impulse. But now, holding the knowledge of her secret, it had become something more. It had become a choice. And Kyle knew he could not send her to face this evil alone. Her fight, he was beginning to realize, had just become his. While Abigail healed in the sanctuary of the canyon, a different kind of fire was burning in the town of Redemption. It was the fire of Jedediah Croft's rage. He was a man accustomed to control, and his wife's disappearance was a public challenge to his authority, an intolerable act of defiance. Jedediah was not a handsome man, but he was imposing. Thick-shouldered and barrel-chested, with a florid face and pale, piggish eyes that missed nothing. He moved with the arrogant swagger of a man who had never been told no. His deputy's star was pinned to a stained leather vest, a symbol not of justice, but of ownership. He owned Redemption and everyone in it. He stormed into the office of Marshal Bartholomew Bart. Low without knocking. Low was a scarecrow of a man, thin and stooped, with a drooping mustache that seemed to absorb all the moisture from his face. He owed his position, his salary, and his continued good health entirely to Jedediah Croft. "She's gone," Croft snarled, slamming a meaty fist on Low's cluttered desk, sending papers flying. "My Abigail slipped out 2 nights ago." Low flinched, trying to appear concerned. "Now, Jedediah, I'm sure she just needed some air. She'll turn up." "Turn up?" Croft's voice was a low growl. "She took my emergency cash from the lockbox. And the locket. She took the damn locket." His eyes narrowed. That was the detail that truly terrified him. He'd searched the house for that cursed trinket for years after he thought he'd broken her spirit, but he never found it. He'd assumed she'd lost it. Now he knew. She'd had it all along, hiding it, waiting. "A rider came in from Serenity Creek Station," Croft continued, pacing the small office like a caged bear. "Abernathy sent a telegraph. Said a woman matching her description collapsed on the platform. Said before he could do anything, some Apache buck scooped her up and carried her off into the wilderness." Low paled. "An Apache? Lord Jedediah. The desert will take care of her then. Or he will." Croft spun on him, his face purple with rage. "Don't you get it, you fool? It's not about her. It's about the locket. If she gets to Prescott, if she finds a federal marshal who I can't buy, that little piece of paper in there could hang us both." He leaned in close, his breath hot and foul. "You were there, Bart. You saw the timber supports in that mine shaft. You know how unstable they were." The marshal swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The memory of Thomas Hayes's muffled cries from beneath a ton of rock and dirt was one he worked hard to keep buried with whiskey. "We need trackers," Croft said, straightening up, his mind already working. "The best, not the drunks you usually hire. I want men who can track a ghost over bare rock, and I want them yesterday." Within an hour he had his men, 2 brothers, Clem and Silas Blackwood. They were gaunt, leathery men with sun-bleached hair and colorless eyes that seemed dead to all emotion except avarice. They were renowned scalp hunters, more comfortable in the wilderness than in any town, and they tracked men for money with the same dispassionate efficiency with which a wolf tracks a deer. They held a particular hatred for the Apache. Croft laid a stack of gold eagles on the table in the saloon. "I want her back," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Alive. The Indian. I don't care. In fact, bring me his scalp. There's a bonus in it for you." Clem Blackwood the elder simply grunted and swept the gold into a leather pouch. Silas grinned, revealing a row of stained, broken teeth. "An Apache, you say? Been a while. This'll be fun." They started at Serenity Creek Station. Mr. Abernathy, sweating profusely, told them everything he saw. The Blackwood brothers circled the station on foot, their eyes scanning the ground with an intensity that made Abernathy's skin crawl. They were like vultures searching for a carcass. "He had a horse," Clem said after a half-hour of silent searching, pointing to a set of barely perceptible scuffs on a rock 50 yards away. "Tied it up here, smart. Kept it off the soft ground." "One horse," Silas added, examining the tracks leading away. "But weighted down heavy, carrying two." They followed the trail, a trail that Kyle had tried so hard to conceal. To a normal man, it was invisible. But to the Blackwoods, it was a story written on the land. They saw the displaced pebble, the bruised leaf of a creosote bush, the faintest impression of a shod hoof in a patch of hardened clay. For 2 days they tracked Kyle and Abigail's path. They moved with relentless speed, the desert no obstacle to them. Clem was the master tracker, his eyes deciphering the subtle language of the terrain. Silas was the enforcer, his hand always resting on the butt of the massive Colt revolver strapped to his hip. On the 3rd day, they found the spot where Kyle had stopped to rest the horse, a small oasis where a few drops of water had made the ground softer. The tracks were clearer here. "He's good," Clem muttered, a rare sign of respect. "He's been doubling back, using the rock to hide his trail, but he's burdened, slowed down by the woman." Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Don't matter how good he is, nobody gets away from us." He pointed towards a distinctive series of jagged mesas on the horizon. "He's heading into the stone teeth. Bad place to get cornered." He grinned again. "We'll have him by tomorrow, and the little lady will be on her way home to her loving husband." The way he said it made it clear he knew exactly what kind of love awaited her. They were closer than Kyle knew. Back in the Canyon of Whispers, a fragile peace had settled. But beyond the sanctuary walls, the hunter's snarling pursuit was drawing ever nearer. A storm of violence, ready to break upon their hidden world. That evening, a profound shift occurred in the canyon. The telling of her secret had unburdened Abigail, but it had placed a new weight upon Kyle. He was no longer just a protector. He was a keeper of her truth, a witness. He asked to see the patent again. Under the flickering firelight, he smoothed the delicate paper across his knee. He didn't just read the English words. He studied the surveyor's marks, the lines indicating ridges, valleys, and a distinctive triple-peaked mountain that dominated the northern edge of the claim. A cold dread, a feeling of grim certainty, settled in his stomach. "I know this place," he said, his voice quiet but resonant with a new intensity. "This land, the mountain your father drew. My people call it Dzil-Ncha-Sian, the mountain of whispering spirits. It is a sacred place, a burial ground for our chiefs." Abigail looked at him, her eyes wide with incomprehension. "A burial ground for generations," Kyle affirmed, his gaze distant, as if looking through the canyon walls and across the miles. "It is where the spirits of our leaders speak to the wind, to dig there, to tear into the earth for the shining metal. It is a desecration, a deep sickness." Suddenly all the pieces clicked into place, the accidents that had plagued other prospectors who got too close, the rumors of the area being haunted. It wasn't a curse. It was the Apache protecting their sacred land. And now, Jedediah Croft's silver mine, the source of all his power and all her misery, was a festering wound on the soul of Kyle's people. He traced the outline of the mountain on the map with his finger. "My grandfather is buried there." The words were spoken with a quiet, devastating finality. Abigail felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Her personal tragedy was interwoven with a much older, deeper sacrilege. It wasn't just her father's legacy that had been stolen. It was Kyle's heritage that was being violated. Their separate fights against the same man had just converged into a single, indivisible cause. I didn't know," she whispered, horrified. "My father, he wouldn't have. He had respect for your people. He traded fairly. He wouldn't have knowingly." "Your father was looking for silver," Kyle said, his voice without accusation. "Jedediah Croft is looking for power. They are not the same. Your father saw the rock. Croft sees only the money. He does not care what spirits he disturbs or what graves he robs." He fell silent, folding the patent with reverent care. The paper was no longer just a legal document. It was a holy relic, a tool that could potentially heal this desecration. Getting it to Prescott was no longer just about justice for one man, Thomas Hayes. It was about reclaiming sacred ground. "We cannot stay here," Kyle said, his decision made. The sanctuary was no longer safe. Croft's trackers, if they were any good, would be closing in. "Prescott is a 3-day ride from here, if we push hard. The trail is dangerous, open. We will be hunted." "We?" Abigail asked, her heart leaping. "We," Kyle confirmed, meeting her gaze. There was no question in his eyes. "This is my fight now, too. That mine must be silenced. The mountain must be allowed to rest." The plan began to form, spoken in low tones over the dying embers of the fire. They couldn't take the main trails. Croft would have them watched. Kyle knew other ways. Ancient paths through the Badlands that were treacherous but concealed. It would be a harder journey, but a safer one. "You will have to ride hard," he warned her. "Harder than you ever have before. There will be little rest." "I can do it," she said, her voice filled with a resolve she hadn't possessed a week ago. The bruises on her face had faded to a sickly yellow, but a new light burned in her eyes. She was no longer just a victim running away. She was a woman riding toward a reckoning. Kyle gathered their meager supplies, a small sack of dried meat, 2 full canteens, his knife, and a bow with a quiver of arrows he had crafted with lethal precision. He also had a rifle, an old but reliable Springfield, with only a handful of cartridges. It was to be used only in the most dire of circumstances, as a gunshot would echo for miles. As he prepared the horse, Abigail secured the locket back around her neck, tucking it deep beneath her dress. It felt different now, heavier. It was the weight of 2 people's futures, a fragile piece of paper that could either redeem them or be their death warrant. "Are you ready?" Kyle asked, standing beside the Mustang, its reins in his hand. Abigail took a deep breath, the cool night air steadying her nerves. She looked at the quiet warrior before her, a man whose people had been wronged by her own, yet who had shown her more honor and kindness than her husband ever had. She looked at the path leading out of the canyon, into the vast, dangerous dark. She was no longer the broken woman who had collapsed at the station. The canyon had healed her body. Kyle had healed something deeper. "I'm ready," she said. He helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her, his presence a shield at her back. With a soft click of his tongue, he urged the Mustang forward, out of the canyon of whispers and into the moon-drenched wilderness. The hunt was on. But now, the hunted were fighting back. The journey to Prescott was a fever dream of rock and sky. Kyle pushed them relentlessly, navigating by the stars at night and the subtle contours of the land by day. He chose paths that seemed impossible, narrow ledges overlooking dizzying drops, and winding canyons that confused the sun's direction. Abigail clung to the horse's mane, her body protesting every jarring step, but she never complained. She matched Kyle's stoicism with a quiet determination that earned his silent respect. Late on the second day, they stopped in a narrow, shaded wash to rest the horse. Kyle slid off the Mustang, his body tense. He scanned the ridges above them, his nostrils flaring slightly, like a deer testing the wind. "What is it?" Abigail whispered. "They are close," he said, his voice a low growl. "Too close." He pointed to a small pile of stones on a distant butte, a formation that looked almost natural. "That was not there this morning. It is a sign. From one tracker to another, they are telling each other where we are." A cold fear gripped Abigail. "What do we do?" "We separate," Kyle said, his eyes hard. The words hit her like a physical blow. "They hunt two people on one horse. I will leave a clear trail for them to follow, heading north. You will take the horse and ride west, toward the Verde River. Follow it downstream. It will lead you to Prescott." "No," she said, her voice shaking. "I won't leave you." "They want me," Kyle stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Croft offered a bonus for my scalp. They will follow the man, not the woman. You are a better rider now. You can make it." He was already pulling his supplies from the saddlebag. He gave her the water skin, the last of the dried meat, and the rifle. "Do not use this unless you have no choice. The sound will bring them." "Kyle, please." He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip firm but not violent. He looked directly into her eyes. "Your fight is in Prescott, with the law. My fight is here, in these rocks. This is the only way. Now go." He slapped the horse's rump, and the startled animal bolted down the wash. Abigail looked back, her heart shattering, as Kyle scrambled up the rock face, a phantom moving against the stone, heading in the opposite direction. He was drawing the wolves away from her. He was sacrificing himself for her. For 2 hours, Abigail rode as hard as she could, tears streaming down her face, the guilt a burning coal in her stomach. The terrain grew rougher, and she had to slow the horse to a walk. As she rounded a bend in the canyon, her blood ran cold. Silas Blackwood sat on a rock, casually cleaning his fingernails with the tip of his knife. He grinned at her, his broken teeth a yellow stain in the twilight. "Evening, ma'am," he drawled. "Lost your partner?" Panic seized her. She fumbled for the rifle, but he was too fast. He lunged, dragging her from the horse. She screamed, fighting back with a fury she didn't know she possessed, but he was too strong. He threw her to the ground, the impact knocking the wind from her. Now, little lady," he sneered, pinning her arms. "No need for all that. The boss just wants you back, and we always deliver." From up the canyon, a voice called out, "Silas, did you get her?" Clem Blackwood appeared, leading his own horse. His face was grim. "Where's the Apache?" "Split up," Silas grunted, holding the struggling Abigail. "He laid a real pretty trail north, but I ain't as dumb as he thinks. I circled wide. Knew he'd send the girl the easy way, down the wash. Here she is." Clem looked down at Abigail, then at the tracks. He sighed. "You're a fool, Silas. This is what he wanted. He wanted to separate us." A sound, like a hawk's cry, echoed from the canyon rim above them. Both brothers looked up. Kyle stood silhouetted against the dying sun. He had his bow, an arrow nocked and aimed directly at Silas's chest. "Let her go," Kyle's voice boomed, amplified by the canyon walls. Silas laughed. "Or what, Redskin? You'll shoot me? Then my brother puts a bullet in you, and the girl still comes with us. Look behind you, Kyle said calmly. Clem spun around. At the mouth of the canyon, blocking their exit, stood Kyle's horse. It hadn't run away. It had been trained. It stood like a statue, a silent sentinel. And tied to its saddle were several bundles of dry brush soaked in something. What in the hell? Clem started to say. From his perch, Kyle raised a burning branch he'd lit with a flint. You have two choices, he called out. Let her go and walk out of this canyon, or I burn it down with you inside. The dry wash was a tinderbox. The brush tied to the horse would create a wall of fire at the entrance, and the dry grass and scrub around them would go up in seconds. It was a death trap. Clem looked at the bow, then at the fire, then at his brother. He was a killer, but he wasn't suicidal. He nodded slowly. Let her go, Silas. But the money! The money's no good if you're a pile of ashes, Clem snarled. Let her go. Reluctantly, Silas shoved Abigail away from him. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes fixed on Kyle. Walk to the horse, Kyle commanded her. Slowly. She did as he said, her legs trembling. The Blackwood brothers watched her go, their faces masks of pure hatred. She reached the Mustang, untied the fire bundles, and mounted. Kyle kept his arrow trained on them until she was clear of the canyon mouth. Then, with one last look, he lowered his bow and melted back into the rocks. He was gone. The brothers were left standing in the canyon, defeated and humiliated. He played us, Silas spat. He played us both. Clem didn't answer. He was staring at the spot where Kyle had been standing. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. They had been outsmarted, outfought. And Clem Blackwood was not a man who tolerated disrespect. Their hunt was no longer for gold. It was for revenge. The plan had changed. It was no longer about getting to Prescott. Kyle knew the Blackwoods wouldn't give up. They were dishonored, and that made them more dangerous than ever. They wouldn't be fooled a second time. We cannot go to Prescott, Kyle said, as they made camp that night in a hidden alcove. They will expect it. Croft will have men watching every trail into the city. Then what do we do? Abigail asked, her hope starting to fade. We have to get the patent to the law. Then we will not go to the law, Kyle said, a strange light in his eyes. We will bring the law to him. He explained his new, breathtakingly audacious plan. He knew of a federal judge, a famously incorruptible man named Josiah Black, who was touring the territory. He was scheduled to visit the courthouse in Redemption itself to review land deeds and mining claims. It was public knowledge, something Kyle had learned from a trader weeks ago. Croft would have to be there, putting on a show of legitimacy for the federal official. That was where they would strike. Not in the wilderness, but in the heart of Croft's own town. It's madness, Abigail breathed. Madness is to walk into a trap, Kyle countered. His own mine, his own town, that is his fortress. He will never expect us to ride into the heart of his power. They rode through the night, turning south, back towards the mountain of whispering spirits. They arrived at the outskirts of the mining camp at dawn. It was a raw, ugly scar on the landscape. The earth was torn open, bleeding gray tailings down the side of the sacred mountain. The rhythmic clang of pickaxes and the shouts of men echoed in the morning air. A profane noise in this once silent place. They tethered the horse in a hidden copse of trees. Kyle produced a tattered piece of canvas from his saddlebag. Cover your hair. Keep your head down. You are just another camp woman. No one will look twice. Walking into Redemption was the hardest thing Abigail had ever done. Every shadow seemed to hold Jedediah's sneering face. The town was buzzing. The federal judge's arrival was a major event. Men were cleaner. The saloon was quieter. Jedediah Croft, preening and puffed up with self-importance, stood on the courthouse steps, greeting Judge Black as he stepped out of a carriage. Kyle and Abigail slipped into the crowd that had gathered, finding a spot near the back of the packed courtroom. It was hot and smelled of sweat and unwashed bodies. Marshal Bart Lowe stood near the front, looking nervous. Judge Josiah Black was a hawk of a man with piercing blue eyes and a fringe of white hair. He tolerated no fools and had a reputation for sniffing out corruption like a bloodhound. He began the proceedings, reviewing documents with a sharp, incisive gaze. Croft was called forward to present the deed for his prosperous Morning Star mine. He strode to the front, oozing confidence, and handed a sheaf of papers to the judge. "All in order, Your Honor. The pride of this territory." Judge Black began to look them over. This was the moment. Kyle gave Abigail a slight nod. Drawing on a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed, Abigail stepped forward from the crowd. "That deed is a fraud," she said. Her voice, though not loud, cut through the murmuring courtroom like a blade. Every head turned. A collective gasp went through the room. Jedediah Croft froze, his face draining of all color. He turned slowly and his eyes widened in disbelief and fury as he saw his wife, bruised but standing tall, not 10 feet from him. "Abigail," he sputtered, "what is the meaning of this? My wife is unwell, Your Honor. She suffers from delusions." "I am not unwell," Abigail said, her voice gaining strength. "And I am not delusional, and I have the proof." She strode forward, past the stunned faces of her former neighbors, and stood before the judge's bench. She unclasped the locket, opened it, and removed the yellowed folded patent. "This is the original claim to that land," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "Filed by my father, Thomas Hayes, the man my husband murdered to get it." The courtroom erupted. Judge Black banged his gavel, his eyes blazing. "Silence! Order!" He took the patent from Abigail's trembling hand and unfolded it. He compared it to the one Croft had presented. The signatures were different. The dates told a clear story. The seal on Abigail's document was older, more authentic. Croft lunged for her. "You witch! I'll kill you!" He never made it. Kyle moved from the back of the room with blinding speed. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply intercepted Croft's charge, using the man's own momentum to send him sprawling to the floor in a heap. At the same time, Marshal Lowe, seeing the game was up, drew his revolver, his panicked eyes darting between the judge and Kyle. "Nobody move! This is official business!" "Put that weapon down, Marshal!" Judge Black commanded, his voice like cracking ice. "You are an officer of the court, not a thug's hired gun." But Lowe was too far gone in his terror. He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at Abigail. "It was him!" he shrieked, pointing at the still-dazed Croft. "It was all his idea." Before he could fire, a figure moved at the courtroom door. It was Clem Blackwood. He and his brother had tracked them to the town, had seen them enter the courthouse. But they weren't there for Croft's gold anymore. Clem had seen the 2 patents from the doorway. He was a scoundrel, but he had a strange frontier code of his own. A deal was a deal, but he had no stomach for a man who murdered his partner and beat his wife. The bonus for an Apache scalp wasn't worth being on the wrong end of a federal judge's wrath. In one smooth motion, Clem drew his own pistol and brought the barrel down hard on Marshal Lowe's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Lowe yelped in pain, clutching his broken hand. "Seems to me the lady's telling the truth, Judge," Clem Blackwood said in a gravelly voice, tipping his hat. Silas stood behind him, looking just as surprised at his brother's action. The room was silent, the drama complete. Jedediah Croft on the floor, looked up to see the judge's condemning stare, Kyle's cold contempt, and his wife's triumphant, tear-streaked face. His entire world, built on a single vicious lie, had just crumbled into dust around him. The reckoning had come, not in a blaze of gunfire in the wilderness, but under the harsh, unwavering light of the law he had so long mocked. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Judge Black, with the force of federal authority behind him, took control. Jedediah Croft and the whimpering Bart Lowe were clapped in irons, their badges of office stripped from them in front of the entire town. The Blackwood brothers, having unexpectedly landed on the right side of the law, were given a nod by the judge and quietly melted back into the wilderness, their debt settled in their own way. The court officially recognized Thomas Hayes's original patent. The Morning Star mine and all its wealth belonged to Abigail. The news spread through the territory like wildfire. The woman Jedediah Croft had brutalized had returned, and with the help of a silent Apache warrior, had brought him to ruin. In the days that followed, a new and unfamiliar life began for Abigail. She was no longer a pariah, but a figure of respect and of some awe. She was a wealthy woman. Lawyers and bankers, men who had once ignored her existence, now tripped over themselves to offer their services. But the victory felt hollow without the man who had made it possible. Kyle had disappeared the moment the verdict was clear. He did not seek thanks or reward. He had vanished as quietly as he had appeared, back to the wilderness that was his home. Abigail found him 2 days later. She knew where he would be. She rode a newly purchased mare out to the base of the Mountain of Whispering Spirits. The mine was silent, shut down by order of the court pending her decisions. The unnatural noise was gone, and for the first time she could hear what Kyle had heard, the whisper of the wind over the peaks. He was standing on a ridge, looking out over his ancestral lands. He was not surprised to see her. "The noise has stopped," he said without turning. "I had it closed," she replied, dismounting and walking to stand beside him. "Permanently. I'm signing the land over to the San Carlos Reservation. It will be protected. It will be yours again." Now he turned, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw no deceit, only a profound sincerity. He gave a slow, solemn nod. "You have a good heart, Abigail Hayes. You have honored your father, and you have honored my ancestors." "You honored me, Kyle," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life. You gave me back my freedom." An unspoken truth hung in the air between them. They were from two different worlds, drawn together by a shared enemy. Now that enemy was gone, and their paths were diverging again. She could not live in his world of spirits and wilderness, and he could not, would not, live in her world of banks and courtrooms. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she said, looking at the horizon. "The money, the silver Jedediah already took out. I'm going to use it. I'm going to buy the old mission house outside of Prescott. I'll make it a sanctuary, a real one, for women like me, women who have nowhere else to run." A rare, small smile touched Kyle's lips. It transformed his stoic face. "The Canyon of Whispers was a good place for you. You will make a good place for them." It was time to go. There were no words for a goodbye like this. He had been her rescuer, her guardian, her confidant. He had shown her a strength and an honor she never knew existed. She reached out, not to touch him, but simply as a gesture. "Will I ever see you again?" Kyle looked up at the vast, endless sky that covered them both. "The sky is the same over Prescott as it is over this mountain," he said. "We will be under the same sun, the same moon. That will have to be enough." He placed his hand over his heart for a brief moment, a gesture of respect deeper than any handshake, then turned and walked away. He moved with the same fluid grace she remembered from the station, melting into the rocks and scrub until he was gone. Abigail stood there for a long time, watching the spot where he had disappeared. She was alone again. But she was not lonely. She was no longer the bruised woman who had collapsed on a dusty platform. She was Abigail Hayes. She was a survivor, and she had a purpose. She turned her horse towards Prescott, towards her new life, forever changed by the quiet Apache warrior who had carried her away from the darkness and set her on a path toward the light. The American West was forged in tales of hardship and redemption. But few are as powerful as the story of a bond forged in desperation between two people from worlds apart. Abigail's journey from a broken victim to a beacon of hope, and Kyle's quiet stand for a justice that transcended laws and skin color, reminds us that courage isn't about the fight you win, but the one you choose to start. It shows that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't healed by time, but by the unexpected kindness of a stranger who sees the humanity beneath the bruises. If this story of survival, honor, and an unlikely alliance in the unforgiving desert moved you, please take a moment to give this video a like to help us share it with others. Share it with someone who appreciates tales of resilience, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We have so many more stories from the forgotten corners of the Wild West to tell, and we'd be honored to have you along for the journey. Thank you for listening.